All right. Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. All right. I see some faces. That's good. I know there's a couple of people getting admitted into the waiting room. That's nice. That's great. I see my mother who's on here, just in case you all think you're never too old to have your mom come to one of your talks. So she's a she's faculty at George Mason University. So she's not just here for her son, she's here also for some intellectual purposes.
It's my son. My son, the professor.
All right. Shh. This is actually being recorded. This will now be in the UV archive. So I've already that level of embarrassment's already too much. All right, I think just maybe a couple more people. I'll just give it like maybe 10 more seconds and then I'll start. All right. Plenty of people, so I think, but not such a huge crowd that I think we could still have a nice kind of online conversation aspect to this. So that'll be great. I'm gonna mostly have my slides up, but Carly Ogletree will be monitoring the chat, and she'll be monitoring questions. So, I mean, if there's like certain important or immediate questions, feel free to like say so, and I can be interrupted and in the middle of the talk. I don't mind. And if not, like hopefully we'll have some time toward the end of the talk to address some conversation a little bit about this. But it's always hard to facilitate that online. I want to thank you all for coming today. Um, I'm very excited I'm always very excited to engage with people about generative AI because I think, in particular, GPTs are a truly innovative technology, something very different than we've experienced ever before. And maybe to start things off a little spicy this afternoon, I'm going to trash a different piece of technology. So you're going to know I'm not afraid to like voice an opinion here. Well, I mean, I think they're more than opinions. I think, I was wrong once or twice in my life, but uh, so oh, get the slides going here. Yeah, great. So generative AI is not VR. In fact, there are recorded talks of me on YouTube where I tell you that I think even as far back as like 10 years ago, that VR is not a particularly transformative technology when it comes specifically to education, but I would even go further beyond that. VR has been around for a while. Its popularity often comes in waves. There's plenty of exciting uses for VR, but the benefits of VR are always seem to be sometime off in the future, or it's right around the corner. And then there's often just plenty of dead ends. There's a cycle of this over and over again. And we're still very far away from when VR and this kind of technology is going to be truly accessible to everybody. But generative AI is actually a truly rare circumstance where technology has changed a lot of different fields, but really it's changed education virtually overnight, metaphorically overnight. The reality is that text and image generation is already incredibly widely used by students. And I'll get into data and I'll get into facts about that. It's increasingly being used by instructors, and it's only going to grow exponentially. And people often use the word exponentially as kind of hyperbole to say a lot. No, no, no. Probably an exponential growth curve, right? As like all the major like tech companies, Microsoft, Google, Apple, finish their integration of generative AI. Finish their integration. They're already at work at it. It's not something that's going to be far off in the
Clean out the
future.
garbage can in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Don't hold on. Mute yourself. I can't answer any questions about your garbage. Okay. So the point I want to make here is that it's not so much that the cat's out of the bag in terms of generative AI, but that the cat jumped out of the bag, then it set fire to the bag, so there's no putting the cat back in the bag. And besides that being impressive for a cat to do, it's as impressive maybe as the technology. There's no going back to this. We can't decide that we're going to legislate or try and enforce a stop of generative AI, and we need to recognize this. So the first thing I want to tell everyone to do is not to panic. I think there is actually a lot of panic, particularly in the world of education, whether that panic is in the form of I want to retire, or that panic is in the form of I need to change completely everything I do for a course. I don't think we need to panic because we've been through this kind of major change before. Let me illustrate that a little bit. So calculators, if you're as old as I am or older, you remember when there were debates about calculators. Great, yeah. But, do we teach math or other sciences with a calculator? Yes, we do. Because even as far back as like 1986, and you can see the citation here, which is 38 years ago. Whoa, okay. We knew that calculators were a good thing for learning, really, as far back as 1986. And other tech, like a calculator, was debated. The word processor was debated. Will people know how to write if they use a word processor? What if they use spell? What about, their handwriting, right? All these kind of things. Will they be able to perform basic calculations? Will they be able to calculate change when they're purchasing them at a store, right? So this was the question, right? But again, we knew the calculator was good for learning. But we still debate today about calculators. It's not like everyone has universal agreement about this. This is a screenshot of a website I pulled up recently. I didn't work very hard to find this website. It was from just a basic search on Google, and I'm not going to tell you the website because I really don't want to endorse it, right? But the point is, even though there's pretty good consensus that calculators are an everyday part of life, that they're good for learning mathematics, we're still debating whether we should use calculators. Okay, or at least some people want to make that debate. All right, so maybe some of you are like, please, that's ridiculous. Calculators, that's the parallel you want to go. Okay, how about something, transformative like the internet, right? We've known now for more than 20 years that the internet's a fundamental part of education. And it's not just students, by the way, that know the internet is good. Parents of students know that the internet was overall a good thing. Again, back in 2001. Okay. And so have we reached consensus about that? Are we still concerned about that? No, you can probably guess where I'm going here, another website. And sometimes technology, even with all that it's good, it's going to have some negative effects. The internet can have negative effects. We can probably, that's probably a whole big long talk about the internet and negative effects, right? But if you read the text, again, from a website, you're going to see that some people will argue it's not that the negative impacts of the internet are about cyberbullying or cheating, but they're going to cite things like a lack of creativity. And I'm going to argue that's a criticism that's really without merit. So if we want to talk about a technology and the way it's going to possibly transform things, it's okay to think about things from a negative perspective or to worry about things that are critical, but we have to be realistic about it. And I don't think saying that the internet reduces creativity is a fair criticism. And in fact, you could probably look at the output of media of all kinds to have overwhelming evidence that it's not about a lack of creativity. The internet's, in fact, maybe a fountain of creativity. So you might say, okay, but the internet is not a particular piece of technology. Okay, great. So let's try smartphones. And then that'll be my last example of how we've been through this before. It's a relatively newer technology, especially compared to the other ones that I've described. And so a question we can ask, what's the zeitgeist about smartphones? Are smartphones causing kind of, panic in terms of learning outcomes and in terms of education? Well, yeah, let's not kid ourselves. Parents are against them. Parents are often against cell phones. There's real concerns about the ubiquity and the use of smartphones. But if you look at why people are against smartphones, why parents are against smartphones, it's not because of pedagogical reasons. You can see here in this research. They recognize the smartphone as having pedagogical value. We just hate some of the social and psychological impacts of the ubiquity of smartphones. So as far as learning is concerned, we don't necessarily have to prevent people from using smartphones. We probably, in fact, should embrace them for educational purposes and maybe worry about some of the other impacts. But again, just because we know better doesn't mean we're going to prevent ourselves from panicking about this kind of stuff. And we really need to stop. And this is actually a colleague of mine over at Stanford. He's a really lovely guy. He's a smart guy. But I mean, publicly, shame on him for writing an article like this. I mean, really. I mean, there's so much evidence that technology is good for learning. And if you're going to make a conclusion about it, that technology is bad for learning, well, let me suggest you're a Luddite or you're looking at the past in rose-tinted glasses. So I have some spicy takes here about, the advantage and the value of technology. And I don't want us in the United States or North America or wherever you're contacting, where they're coming to this talk from, I don't want us to be France. I don't know if you guys saw this. This is hot off the press today. France is going to trial a ban on mobile phones at school for up to the age of 15. Look, if we're serious about the negative impact of some technology, right? Let's be practical about it. If anything, it should be the flipped model here. We should allow mobile phones at school and ban them outside of school, especially if we want kids to be learning and we don't want to worry about some of the social psychological challenges. And I think we're at that point right now. We're at this inflection point right now with generative AI. And what I'm really worried about here, and don't worry, I'm going to get to the assessment piece. You didn't come here for no reason. We're going to get into assessment and what you can do in your classrooms and so on and so forth. But it's important to make this argument because some people might be here is like, great, how do I fight the use of generative AI in assessment? And I would argue if you're trying to fight the use of generative AI and assessment, then what you're really trying to do is you're going to be potentially turning generative AI into atomic energy. So what do I mean by atomic energy? Okay. Yeah, anyone, did you all see this movie? Right? It's one of those troubled genius men movies, right? So if you didn't care for it for that particular reason, I understand. But the point here is that atomic science, right, can and was used for terribly destructive power. And so I want to really kind of get into a little bit of an uncomfortable subject here to make a point. About how many people do you think worldwide have died from atomic bombs? You can put it in the chat. You might want to be curious to see what each other have guessed. I'll give it like maybe 30 seconds. If this was in person, I could like point to people and say, what do you think? And by the way, it's really, kind of arbitrary, and I don't want to sound flippant or superficial when I'm saying like measuring death from atomic bombs, right? There are other negative impacts, so on and so forth. So I'm just using this as like a quantifiable number, and I'm not making light of anything or belittling anything. So I see some people posted. So the best kind of conservative estimate that I can find, and by conservative, I mean maybe erring on the side of more rather than less, because we don't want to diminish the potential amount of death that's come from atomic bombs. Is about 250,000 people. That is, since the very first atomic bomb up till today, about 250,000 people have died from atomic bombs. Okay, so just keep that number in the back of your head, 250,000 people. You guys, I don't know if some people who are young enough might not recognize this picture. This is 3 Mile Island, right? Right? You might know that was a nuclear accident that occurred here in the United States. Any guess about direct deaths related to 3 Mile Island? I see people entering the chat now. They must feel like they've showed up in the wrong talk, but that's all right. But any direct deaths from 3 Mile Island? The answer is 0. 0 direct deaths. Okay, but again, not to diminish things. What about radiation-related deaths from 3 Mile Island? Most scientists say 0. Most scientists say there were 0 related deaths related to the accident at 3 Mile Island. But let's be conservative here and go with the highest number I could find. The highest number I could find, and that's from non-peer-reviewed research, was they said maybe about 350 people died as a result of radiation and other related issues from 3 Mile Island. So let's add that with the kind of 250,000 that we number before, okay? So, and what about things like, Chernobyl, right? Again, I'm just going through, this is a comprehensive review of all, potential nuclear-related issues, right? Chernobyl, okay, again, Greenpeace says about 300,000, right? So now we're north of, 500,000 deaths related, right? That 300,000, by the way, includes direct, indirect, so on and so forth. It's a debatable number, but probably erring on the side of caution. The Fukushima accident in Japan, in fact, no one died. In fact, a lot of experts now argue that people shouldn't have even evacuated. That was probably a mistake, but okay. So somewhere north of 500,000 people for atomic energy. And as a result of these kind of accidents, no one wants to pursue nuclear energy. It's still pretty much, right? People who care desperately about the environment and world health don't want to pursue nuclear energy. But nuclear energy, atomic energy, has no air pollution. It doesn't. It has no air pollution. Guess how many people died from coal-fired air pollution between 1999 and 2020 in the US alone? So between 1999 and 2020 in the US alone. And I'm getting this data from the National Institute of Health. So I'm not going conservative anymore. I'm just going for reliable, valid resource, careful. About 460,000 people in the US alone have died between 1999 and 2020 from air pollution. Fossil fuels, again, the opposite kind of nuclear energy, in 2018, worldwide, just the year 2018, worldwide, killed 8 million people. That's from the UN. Again, I'm no longer looking for exaggerated numbers. I'm looking for base numbers. And we haven't even touched upon global warming here and its impacts. So the argument here is, as a species, we've made the wrong choice. We were panicked and worried about atomic energy because of its potential and sometimes actual negative impacts. And we made, arguably, the wrong choice here, and we've hurt ourselves as a species. Okay, so then what do we do? Where does this metaphor take us? And it really takes us to, I would argue, 2 doors. Here we are. Are we going to panic about AI, particularly in education, because there are some potential negative impacts? Or are we going to make the right choice? And that's, boy, that sure is leading everybody into what I'm going to make as the argument, right? The panic or the right choice. But I'm asking this question not rhetorically, because you can't be on the sidelines. If you're here online with me right now, it's up to you. You are the educators that are going to make this decision. You make decisions right now in your classroom, in your course. And if you don't make a decision, that is in and of itself a decision, since you're going to be ceding control to the groups who have agendas and biases and are not actually going to be making the choice for the educative choice. So, which way are you going to go? Which door? Let me tell you what the doors are. Door number 1 is fear, panic. And very specifically, let's illustrate it. It's about anti-cheating, treating generative AI as an anti-cheating process, trying to create assignments that are AI-proof, or continuing to teach skills for a world where generative AI is not a factor. Behind door 2, these are assignments that can leverage AI, using AI as a tutor for content and skills. And maybe what I think is the most powerful aspect of using generative AI, of embracing it, is it allow us more time as instructors, as designers of learning experiences, to work on the things that we care about, but we sometimes don't have the time or we forget to work on. Recognizing learning, talking about learning, practicing learning. We can now focus on that by time saving, by work saving around generative AI. And I'm going to get into this. I'm going to unpack all this, all 6 of these kind of bullet points in this talk. All right. So why do you have to make this decision right now? Maybe, yeah, I'm going to get to learn about AI. I'm going to work my way into it. I'll be making a decision over the next couple of years. Nope, you've got to make your decision right now. Why? Well, because it's already being used. I had a colleague who shared with me this really intellectually sound framework. I should have probably put it up on a slide. I apologize. 4 different levels of integrating generative AI into a classroom. One is like refusing to integrate it. One is using it to like help you generate ideas. The second is maybe using it for your own instructional practices. And then the fourth one was like, okay, letting students use it. And I argued that those first 3 are garbage, are irrelevant. Why? Because every single student is now using generative AI. So I tried to look for like a more recent data about summer 2024. I couldn't quite find it. It's probably because we're still in summer 2024 technically. Generative AI, ChatGPT, very specifically actually, ChatGPT's use went down in the summer of 2023 and then rebounded in the fall. Now, correlation is not causation. But why do you think ChatGPT use went down over the summer? Because students are using it. They're using it for their coursework. And this sure does correlate with other data like this, age distribution in particular. You could argue, well, there's an imbalance in terms of gender distribution, and that might be actually an issue that we have to worry about going forward. But look at this age distribution. Of the millions and millions and millions of users of just ChatGPT, by the way, and there's other generative AI tools, there's other GPTs that are out there, just ChatGPT, you could see it's skewing heavily towards young people. Again, correlation isn't necessarily causation, but boy, does this seem like students are using it. Why else do we need to kind of say, okay, we have to confront this? These tools are free. Here you have a screenshot of Bing. Bing is actually, you might be familiar, is actually OpenAI's ChatGPT. I think it might even be a variation of the 4.0. That's not 4.0, that 4 small letter O version, which is their latest kind of publicly available GPT. Gemini, that's Google's tool. It's also free. So these are brand new, cutting edge pieces of technology that is absolutely available to everyone. You might say, okay, well, sure, but maybe they'll put these behind paywalls, and then we won't have to worry about students actually using them in the near future. Well, they're not going away. There are open source tools and models, right? And if you're familiar, those of you that aren't familiar with open source, hopefully everyone's a little bit familiar, right? But the idea there is that the code behind this technology is free, is freely available. We can get into the nuance of that, which is to say that like, well, but they require so much like hardware to use, energy consumption. So is it really truly kind of, free? Well, that's often a kind of a solvable problem, where I would venture to say it's a solvable problem. So even if Microsoft, even if OpenAI, even if Google, even if Apple, even if they decide to start locking their technology behind paywalls and you're worrying about access, there's still going to be free access to these tools, right? Here you see a screenshot from Mistral, which is a French company. These are all open source generative AI models. And then if you're just like, well, great, but it's still, maybe it's only going to be for the most technologically advanced, so on and so forth. Well, it's going to be actually fairly ubiquitous. Apple's actually rolling out all kinds of generative AI tools built into their phones this fall. It's unclear if it'll cost extra money. It looks like at least a decent amount of the services will not. The same with Google. Google Gemini and their latest, I think Google just had a hardware talk about their latest phones and the Android operating system, right? And generative AI is going to be integrated across there kind of ubiquitously. So it's not going away. There's absolutely no hiding from this technology. Okay, so if there's no hiding from the technology, it's as important of a decision as we possibly need to make. I made an analogy to nuclear power, to atomic energy. Let's first agree about what we're talking about, because AI is a pretty wide-ranging concept. We all know what AI means, right? There was even a movie not too long ago, well, actually long ago, by Steven Spielberg, right? It's artificial intelligence. But what does that really mean? In fact, the reality of it is that artificial intelligence is such kind of a catch-all term. People describe almost any type of advanced kind of computing now as artificial intelligence. And sometimes that's a debatable thing. Sometimes it's fair. I'm happy to get into an argument with people who are computer scientists if they want to talk about machine learning and whether that's actually artificial intelligence. I would argue maybe not, but it's neither here nor there, because really, I think the transformation here, the big deal here, is actually starts with large language models. If you've heard the concept of the term large language model, it's a general term for any large-scale artificial intelligence algorithm that's designed on natural language processing. And that's about as clear as I can make it. It's probably as simple of it, and it is exactly as you kind of define it, right? It's an algorithm designed around what is natural language to humans. And what makes them really kind of possible is this concept of the artificial neural network, right? Sometimes maybe people use the concept deep learning. Neural networks are used for tasks like language translation, text summarization. It sounds already, people can maybe tune out with the idea of the concept of a neural network, because it sounds so complex. It actually sounds like artificial life, right? Because we know, right? If you know basic, human biology, we have neurons too in our brains, right? But human brains are way more complex than an artificial neural network. In fact, these artificial neural networks are actually old technology, relatively speaking, and they actually fell out of fashion and weren't used for a very long time. The only reason they even came back in vogue, right, is that computer chips became so good, right, particularly around graphics cards and GPU graphics units, and maybe driven by the game industry. They became, and then of course there was the cryptocurrency, right? And so all these computer cards, all these video cards, right, with these like really incredibly fast processors became kind of ubiquitous in a lot of different places. And it was that the power of this technology that now made kind of these artificial neural networks viable. So it's an old piece of technology, right, that's kind of mimicking a certain way that, like, you can kind of predict future answers and draw connections. I can get into details of it. It's not that important, right? But the reason why this is all important is all GPTs really is they're large language models that are similar to they're built around these like artificial neural networks. And it's the GPT that I would argue is what's truly transformative here. So let's actually spend a second playing around with the concept, and we're actually going to play something. All right. So what does GPT stand for? It stands for generative pre-trained transformer. What does the generative piece mean? It literally means creating something. So I have here a picture of the Big Bang, right? But it's like from nothing, something was created. Okay. That's all the generative piece really means, the actual creating of something. What does the pre-trained mean, right? The pre-trained part means is that before, in order to kind of put some finite determinants around what is being created, right, there was training for the artificial intelligence. In fact, often the training part is called machine learning. It basically refers to this concept that the model's generative capabilities was trained on a corpus of data. The data that you feed the model results in its capabilities. Part of the excitement around ChatGPT and other kind of similar GPTs is that they were trained in what's called an unsupervised learning approach off of data on the internet. And that means exactly what it sounds like, right? So, imagine when a kid said something like, profound or surprising to you, and you're like, whoa, where did you learn that? And they said, oh, I learned it on the internet. So that's kind of like, what are some of those results? Hold on, did I say everything I wanted to say about the prior slide? Let me see. Yeah, perfect. Okay. And so that's all the pre-training piece really means. Now, the transformer piece, this is maybe where there was a big technological breakthrough recently, right? Transformers are a type of deep learning mode or neural network, right? Again, used in natural language processing often. At its simplest, the model looks at what it is generating, and then based on the probability of what should come next, it then supplies that next thing or fills in that next thing. For words, right, the transformer, so like actual words, the transformer is the part of the model that predicts the next word in a sequence of words. So that's a lot to throw at you. So let's play a game real quick. We're going to do it. We have the chat. Okay, we're going to learn by example. So everyone right now in this talk, we're going to turn ourselves into an analog human version of a GPT. You ready? Okay. So the generative part, well, we as human beings, we've got that skill. We know how to create words. So we're going to go ahead and say we've got the generative piece of technology done. Now let's do some training real quick. I know a lot of people on the talk are from the Buffalo region or have connections to the Buffalo region, so I'm going to say that is the training. If you're not from the Buffalo region or you know people from the Buffalo region, right? You might know a little bit about the NFL and football. Okay, so that's all you need to know in terms of like your training part. Maybe you've learned a little bit over the years. The transformer part, again, is that we're about to say the word that is going to immediately pop into our heads immediately after, okay? So I want you to get ready to write this down in the chat. Let's see how many of you share the exact same word and how many of you say something completely different. And say whatever you want, okay? I'm going to say it now. The bills make me wanna. Type in the first word that comes to your head. The bills make me wanna. Again, what's the immediate thing that comes in? Come on, it's only a couple people do it. This is important. We're all analog. This is an analog GPT. We're a human-based GPT. Say the word, say the word. All right, I can't see the chat without getting rid of my my screen. I don't want to mess this up. But I'm guessing the most common word that you'll see right there is shout. So those of you that are familiar with the Bills, this is essentially the Bills fight song. It's a version of the Isleys Brothers classic hit, right? It's, to shout, okay? Sung at all the Bills games. You could have actually said a completely different phrase. I'm sure there were some other words, but the most predictable, probable word was shout. I always actually say, now that I've been here a decade in the Buffalo region, actually more than a decade, the Bills make me want to rethink whether it was a good idea to become a dedicated fan of them since they just break my heart repeatedly. But that's not the most predictive word. The most predictive word is shout. And that's all GPTs are. It's just the most predictive piece of what comes next. And if you think about GPTs like that, it's all of a sudden not a particularly scary technology. In fact, it might even kind of be easier to figure out how we want to use it. So the GPTs that generate text, right? They're just exactly like what we did. They're just thinking of what's the next word. And of course, and then what's the next word after, and what's the next word after, and what's the next word after. Now, when you string all those words together, it can feel like you're talking to maybe another human, or speech or interaction that feels incredibly human-like. But that's all the technology is. It's just predicting what should be the next word. And for the GPTs that create images, right? They're just guessing what's the next pixel. That's all the technology is. It's not artificial intelligence like we would think of, like, robots that are just like humans. It's not that. It is artificial intelligence. It's truly a transformative piece of technology, but at its core, that's what all this is. Okay, so let's get into maybe the nitty-gritty, why you guys came here. Let's get into assessment. Okay. So now you know all this kind of stuff and you know the argument and why it's important, but what do we do? Okay, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of my own personal story, and then I'm going to tell you what I would make as general recommendations. I teach online courses here at the University of Buffalo. And I noticed over the last couple of years, I was getting often sometimes similar kind of types of responses to a lot of my assessments, but of course they were different enough that it wasn't really cheating, or it wasn't people weren't copying from each other. I took some of my assessments about a year ago, maybe a little bit more, and I started plugging my assessments into different GPTs. And you know what? They did an incredibly good job. In fact, I began to suspect that what I thought were kind of similar but high quality work done by students was actually being used by these tools. So I tried to unpack a little bit more from this. And I had a conversation with my teenagers. I have two teenagers, both high school students, one starting actually high school. I asked them, do you guys use these tools? And these are good students. My kids are good. They're actually boringly good. They're actually academically inclined. And I said, are you using these tools? And they said, well, not exactly. So I already knew the answer was yes. That means they do use the tools. And I said, what are you using the tools for? And they said, honestly, well, sometimes to get ideas, sometimes to proof my work, sometimes to kind of like if I'm stuck on something, sometimes to kind of get additional explanations. So again, if you remain unconvinced by everything that I've talked about up until now, take some of your assessments, plug them into one of these free tools. I guarantee you it's going to be transformative, but don't panic. But don't panic if it's like, oh no, my assessments don't work, because now let's talk about what you can do about this. So I like to kind of split the ways of what you can approach these things into three levels: level 0, level 1, and level 2. Level 0 is stuff you shouldn't do. Level 1 is stuff you could probably do almost immediately. And level 2 is stuff that you can probably start planning to do in the near future, not necessarily immediately tonight or tomorrow, but sometime soon. So again, stuff you shouldn't do, level 0, level 1, stuff you can do right away, and then level 2, stuff you can do in the near future. So level 0, let's get this out of the way. Great. I would argue these four categories of things. So by anti-cheating, it means trying to fight and prevent the use of generative AI. Actually, I should say that's actually rejecting technology. The anti-cheating one is trying to catch students who are using generative AI by using some cheating detection tools. I would say the kind of blanket prove your work, unless you're going to be satisfied with, a couple sentences of a prompt into a generative AI tool in terms of like proving that the students did anything, unless that really satisfies you, and there's absolutely no proof that that's worth anything in terms of an assessment, don't bother with proving your work. Don't bother hiding from this technology. And this last one is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. The way to approach this is maybe not to talk about like our feelings. Is there a tool for catching students that cheat? I like this little bit of a kind of a story here. You can't tell the difference with 100% confidence of whether a student has used ChatGPT on an assignment. Now, ChatGPT back in January of 2023 said they created a tool that will catch students trying to cheat using ChatGPT. Okay, great. Then, so not too long later, they admitted, nope, the tool just doesn't work. It's not reliable. This is, by the way, from the OpenAI, the ChatGPT FAQ. This is from their website. Okay? You cannot detect tools. They're arguing it. Now you might say, okay, well then they're biased. They want to argue for the use of these tools. So they're gonna say, no, don't bother forbidding it, right? So you have other, technologies. This is ChatGPT 0, right? You can see there in the kind of the small text at the bottom, right? This one's endorsed by the American Federation of Teachers, so it's got to work, right? Go ahead, play around with it if you want, GPT 0. By the way, with almost minimal effort on my end, I was able to fool it into thinking that it was, GPT-related work, when in fact, it was human-related work and vice versa. But even if you're like, well, the technology will get better, forget about it. This is a Cold War battle you will lose. Don't bother with trying to prevent cheating, because now there's these kind of pieces of technology, right? This is an example of a website. This is a real-world website where you feed AI-generated text into it, and then it creates more humanized text. Calls itself a humanizer, which feels like a setup for a joke, but never mind. But in other words, right, so people are already like trying to like, okay, so anything that's going to detect cheating, right, it's not going to work. So like, again, the level 0 stuff, don't bother. But there is things you can do. Let's get into level 1. I already talked about feeding your assignments into the GPTs. Problems, if you're kind of teaching math, chemistry, something, a science of some time, article summaries, right? If you're expecting them, feed them into the GPTs, discussion board posts, term papers. Go ahead and see what the results are immediately. And then at least with that, you might say, great. So how do I want students to work past those assignments? What do I want them to do with those assignments? And the other thing you could do is use it immediately, right now, and to improve your current instruction. You can say, oh, do I want multiple explanations? Do I want additional graphics to help people understand things? Do I want to give students tutoring, but I don't have the time? I'm just the single instructor. So let me get into it. Let's go deep on the feeding your assignments into GPTs one, right? Don't just feed your major assignments into the GPTs. Feed as much as you can. You'll see here, this is a real world ChatGPT. ChatGPT now the tool allows you to create specific GPTs. Here's a discussion post responder. It can allow you to respond to a discussion post, craft a reply to the post, write a response. You could modify it and change it. Have it actually feed your work into it right now, and you'll see a little bit. You might say, okay, great. Well, this is the kind of response that's the baseline. You could tell students, I want you to come up with something like this. You could tell students, I want you to come up with variations on it. But you won't know that until you feed your assignments into these tools. And it's going to be for everything, by the way. It's not just even discussion board posts. It's going to be with emails. And so when you feed your assignments into this, don't worry, I'm not just saying, okay, well then great, now you know what the answers are. Because then you can force these tools, these generative AI tools, to give you the recommendation. So let's get into it right now. What are some good ways that I can use a tool like ChatGPT to improve the assessments that I use when teaching a course in higher education? And you can see here is examples of feedback that you immediately get. But let me tell you, this is not where you just start and end. And I think sometimes people who are like, ugh, I don't get this kind of good feedback from these ChatGPT tools, for these GPTs, they say, okay, this is not helpful. And the reason why is once you enter in a question like this, you need to get specific. Then you need to get more specific. Then you need to even get more specific than that. So you see, based on that earlier prompt, here's an example. I've actually said, great, give me an example of how a GPT can be used to improve assessments in a freshman writing seminar. Tried to think of a general thing that everyone's got some kind of experience. So I apologize if it's not like particularly super relevant to your instruction or something, but hopefully you at least understand the process, the concept here. So here, and it gave a ton of different examples. I'm only picking on one right here. It's like generating diverse question types. So what do I mean by more specific, right? Even if you don't like this answer, that's okay. Build off of it. You could say, right? Here it is where I'm saying, did I not? Oh, sorry. I didn't include my original prompt here. Oops. But my original prompt right here was based on the prior answers where I said, I need something that's even more ChatGPT proof than what you're providing as an example. I need something that really forces students to interact with the text that you're going to be generating. And so here it gives this observation and reflection on a real world experience. And spend at least 2 hours observing a specific location or event or a community activity. I had pushed on it and said, I don't want something that could be easily simulated or generated or faked by ChatGPT. Now, you might like this. Oh, to me, this is like, okay, well, maybe I can work with something like this. Maybe I can modify. Maybe I can come up with some ideas. And you might say, no, this still isn't particularly good. But this was all done in about, conservatively, about 15 minutes or so of me thinking about what are good responses, back and forth, pushing back and forth. And I'm already at this kind of level. And you could imagine if you have to invest this time and to push and to get more specific and more specific and more specific, you're going to get good ways to transform your current assignments into something that isn't just completed by ChatGPT, but maybe can leverage or use things like ChatGPT to give you better results. All right. So that was like an example of like what you can do for level 1. And what can you do that you could do this immediately? You can literally plug your assignments in as soon as this talk is over, right? And kind of go and push and push and push and push to see how far you can go. Beyond that, let's talk about like what are level 2 things, right? So this is now when you're going to like try to maybe rethink what is the design of your class. And so I would argue about creating new types of assignments, new types of assessments, teaching things like proofing and editing, teaching accuracy, in fact, teaching students how to actually assess things, and then leveraging students and employers, right? Remember that kind of slide where I showed like how young use of ChatGPT is skewing? It's okay. Ask your students how they're using it. One thing I've designed into one of my courses this semester is I said, okay, if you're going to be using generative AI, that's fine. I know I can't stop you. Minimally, just tell me what tool you're using and what was the prompt you gave it in order to generate the feedback. At least at the end of my course, I'll know what they're doing, what they're using the tool for in an effort to like understand better how it's impacting what I'm trying, what I'm aiming for in terms of the learning objectives. What do I mean by like new types of assignments? Let's get into some examples of that. One thing you could do is have students analyze GPT-generated content and then just justify what it is about their analysis. And so here you'll see, okay, give me 3 reasons that ChatGPT could be used in a freshman writing seminar, but make one of the reasons invalid and the other 2 valid. And so here it's like, are those valid reasons? Have the students ask each other, ask themselves, answer, are those valid reasons? Is this an invalid reason? And if you're thinking that, like, again, that's level of getting more specific, more realistic, and more realistic, again, you can do that and you can incorporate that into the assignment. Here it is about me saying, great, make that last invalid reason more believable, but still make it invalid. I need something less obviously invalid. And here it is trying it. And somewhere here, there's a nuance between valid and invalid. Somewhere here, there's important role for humans to kind of arbitrate and decide what is actually a valid piece and what's an invalid piece. And that's an important skill. And that's going to be a necessary skill with the advent of this technology. And you can incorporate into your courses and around, you can both teach this kind of a skill and also teach the content through that. And so examples, right? Have them compare then and rank each other's analysis. Have them vote. And then have them defend why they decided, which one they decided to rank higher than the other, which one they thought was good and which one wasn't. That's going to be probably a necessary skill. All right. It's 50 minutes. I threw a lot at you. I wanted to at least have a couple of minutes for some questions here at the end. So let me just leave you with this. Everyone here, by the very fact that you're here, you care, you're interested, and you probably have a decent level of expertise. So trust your instincts. Your instincts are probably good. If your instincts tell you this is a good use and I'm not worried about the impact of generative AI, of GPTs on this particular piece of technology, that's great. That's fine. That probably means you're right about it, especially if you tried out the tools, especially if you embraced them on some level. You probably know what you are. You probably know what you're doing, and that's probably a good decision. But combine that with doing the work. There's no hiding from this tool. There's no hiding from this technology. So go straight into changing your assessments if you need to. All right, and that's all I said. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Buffalo. I'm the director of the Open Education Research Lab. I'm in 2 different departments if you want to contact me. So if you see me, I'm in learning and instruction and information science, both in the Graduate School of Education. And if you see my name, I'm also this year, I just started as the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs in the Graduate School of Education, where among my different roles, we'll be creating policies about the use of generative AI in teaching. So there's plenty of more work to do. You might have seen the University of Buffalo's recommendations around generative AI. I would argue that they're very good, but also at a very high level, not necessarily directly actionable by us individual instructors. So there's some work there to be done, but it will be done. All right, and I'll see if I can get any questions. I don't know. I think Carly was going to be monitoring it, but she might have had to stop. She might have lost internet access.
I made it back.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
So one question that popped up was, what's to stop the students from using ChatGPT for level 2? And I'm wondering if the person who asked wanted to say any more about that question. But otherwise, we can just dive in.
Well, if someone does want to say it, they can jump in and interrupt me or debate and something like this. I think the answer is that you haven't reached level 2 until you've discovered that it is ChatGPT proof. And I don't like, actually, again, I'm arguing against that kind of argument. I don't want to really say it's not that. It's, in fact, the way to think about it maybe would be to say, what is the assignment? What is the assessment where I'm comfortable with them using GPTs? I'm comfortable with my students using chat GPTs because I still think they're going to reach the learning objective. And if that's actually the result, if that's your heuristic, then who cares whether they're using the GPT or not if they're meeting the learning objective? And it really is kind of different based on what the course is, right? So let's say I'm teaching students. I'll give you guys a direct example from this. I don't know if it's exactly perfect or exactly works, but this is what I'm doing. So I'm teaching an online course. I'm teaching future librarians, and I'm teaching them how to work with emerging technologies. So there is a role in libraries called an emerging technology librarian. So I said, great, this semester, if you want to use if you want to use generative AI, if you want to use GPTs to create assessments, if you want to analyze technology using, allowing these generative AI tools to write for you, that's fine. But you're going to pick a library and you're going to role play the job of being an emerging technology librarian. And you're going to have to create a technology proposal where you've analyzed all this other technology and then fully create a proposal for implementing a new piece of technology in this library. Is it GPT proof? No, not at all. In fact, they're probably going to use these tools. But I expect in the real world, in the workforce, they're probably actually going to they're going to be using this anyway. So great. So let's embrace the use, right? And if they're going to be using the tool to analyze technology, they're still going to have to get up and make arguments about it. They're still going to have to decide. They're going to be making the decision about which piece of technology. And if in the end, I discover over the course of the semester that the GPT does absolutely everything for them, well, then I might need to face the fact that emerging technology librarians is a job that's been regulated to artificial intelligence, which is really tough. That's a tough thing to embrace. And I don't want to end on something so negative. I don't think that'll be the case. I think actually it'll be important. I think the human will play an important role. But what that role will be, I don't know exactly yet. And I'm hopefully through this course, through the changes to my course, I'll also learn along with my students. That's a kind of a way to get around answering it, but I hope it was enough of a direct answer.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. And just because we're running short on time, I want to make sure that we get to other questions. Olga says, how do you deal with the cases where students generate and submit an entire GPT generated paper?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can tell you again what I'm going to make the argument to do, which is to say, I'm telling them they can do it, which is a little bit ridiculous because they can do it whether I choose to allow it or not, since the detectors are not reliable. So I'm saying, go ahead and do it, but at least tell me what tool you used and what was the prompt you used in order to produce this result. And then my thought is that at least then I'm generating kind of a corpus of data, so to speak, about how students are using these tools and whether it's producing what I had previously thought of, which was a valid assessment. Now, I can tell you this is not going to work perfectly. In fact, again, just to reveal, classes just started yesterday. I had a student in one of my classes. Classes started yesterday. I have a long PowerPoint presentation, like about 20 minutes or so of narrated talk. I have all these directions. And this student had already posted a response with not following all the directions, but with very formally specific language by like 10 a.m. yesterday. So I said to them, listen, you didn't complete the assignment as instructed. And this language sure seems like it was used by it was created by generative AI. Just so you know, read the directions. You can use generative AI, but you have to at least tell me whether you did it or not, and you have to tell me what you used and how you got the result. And the student already emailed me back and claimed not at all. That's just their language style, and they apologized for not reading all the directions. Cheating will always occur. Whether the student is cheating or not, I've probably gone as far as I can morally and probably even policy-wise, according to the university. There's probably not much more I can do. I have to kind of accept them, their statement as the honest truth, and I will. My goal is not to prevent cheaters from trying to cheat themselves out of learning. I think a model of instruction where we're trying to act as gatekeepers and prevent people from passing courses because we don't think they've learned something, I think is going to be one of these things that goes away with generative AI. Instead, I think we have to just think about supporting students in reaching learning objectives. And that's complicated and that's challenging, and that might change all kinds of fields, departments, certifications, processes, but probably that's what we're going to have to do. And now I'm revealing my background. I'm trained as a learning scientist, so I have kind of very specific pedagogical views about specific good ways for pedagogy versus others. And I've never liked tests that act as gatekeepers anyways. Turns out there's pretty overwhelming evidence that they're bad for learning. I hope that doesn't make someone upset. And if it does, please let me know, email me. I'm happy to kind of iterate with you, go back and forth, because I don't want you to leave upset or bummed. I want you to leave this talk kind of energized or willing to try something different. I see Tim, a colleague of mine, Tim Monreal from Learning Instruction, right? Would it be a real interrogation of the learning objectives themselves? Absolutely. We have to probably rethink learning objectives sometimes, but that's okay. Actually, good instructions often means iterating on classes as times change, as objectives change, as students change, and as technology changes. We have to do. It wasn't so long ago that we really cared. We would grade papers. We'd take points off if they didn't use proper grammar, if things weren't spelled correctly. It's now not even necessarily that exciting or important to tackle. Why? Because the technology will take care of it. So why are we going to place a huge amount of grade? Why would I say 50% of your grade is based on your grammar? Not a valid assessment anymore. So yeah, learning objectives themselves definitely have to change. It's 5 o'clock. Am I allowed to keep going, or should we?
Yeah, folks who want to stay on can stay on. We've gone over for all of these, so as long as you'd like.
Okay. I see some good examples there. I see some people at least saying they're going to try something new. That's awesome. I saw a couple of shouts and hey. Yeah, that's a Buffalo specific GPT. Yeah, asking the right questions, right? That's a little bit about prompts, about the prompts that you put into generative AI. There's a way to talk about this that people refer to often, how to use these tools as prompt engineering, if you've heard this term before. The idea there is kind of similar to how there's a skill set into knowing what are the keywords to put into like an internet search engine like Google in order to get a result back. Maybe there are certain ways to specifically teach people the skill of what prompts to put into a GPT, kind of a variation of the get specific, get more specific, get more specific that I talked about in my presentation. The only reason I'm a little bit reticent than to recommend prompt engineering as an important skill, or that should be a skill as part of your courses, is because this technology is changing so rapidly, so quickly. I don't actually know if the skill set of prompt engineering is going to remain a valuable skill going forward. What do I mean by that? Well, first, it could be that the actual means of interactions changes. The idea is that like maybe it's not a matter of typing in the right words, but maybe it's a matter of having casual conversation. I think there's rumors that Amazon is desperately trying to revamp their Echo branded speakers. So if you guys talk to Alexa, if you have an Echo at your home, the idea is that it's going to be basically a version of a GPT using far more in-depth conversation and language back and forth, in which case, is that the same as kind of posting questions, in a prompt? Is that the same in natural conversation? Or maybe it's actually going to become so ubiquitous, the technology, that it won't be a matter of prompting. It'll be a matter of you're doing your work, and the technology itself will actually prompt you with suggestions and recommendations, in which case the skill set there wouldn't be, oh, what do I tell the GPT in order to get a positive result or to get a better result or to improve the results? There, it's a matter of like, well, when do I want the tool to interface with me and when do I not want it to, right? And the best parallel that I can think of that is like, okay, sometimes when you're using like a word processor like Microsoft Word, sometimes it suggests something is misspelled when it actually is spelled correctly. Sometimes it's suggesting a grammar change when, oh no, I actually really want to start this sentence with the word and. I don't know, maybe that's not a good example. I actually really love this use of the semicolon, even if you disagree. I don't know. Those are not the best examples. But the point is that prompt engineering isn't necessarily going to be how we're going to be interfacing with GPTs, even as soon as 3 or 4 months from now. So I worry a little bit about teaching how to use these tools rather than still aiming for the learning objectives and whether the students use the tool or not.
So going in order of the questions that have come in, someone asked, do you think as more professors support the use of generative AI, students would feel more comfortable to share how they use AI? And how do you think the way students use AI would be helpful data for instruction?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the answer is yes, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, right, that one of the policies we're going to get as a university here, but I would argue it's important for every university. I'd argue it's important for K through 12 education, is that yes, it's okay to use these tools, that it's not a matter of not allowing the use of these tools. Or remember, going back to the example of we can't be like France and forbid the use of the mobile phone, in classrooms. We cannot legislate our way. We can't force our way. We can't rule our way out of using these tools. Now, what I'm a little bit nervous about would be like, let's say a university saying, great, you guys can use this tool, but it has to be our licensed version of the tool. You have to use Microsoft Copilot. You have to use the Bing search. Because that puts I worry then we're teaching students how to use Microsoft Word rather than using a word processor as an example. Boy, this whole statement could get me in trouble. Okay, but what are you going to do? But I think yes, as a university, just embracing the use of the tool. And then it's maybe can sound a little trite, but I don't really mean it. I mean it actually, or not corny, or maybe a little corny, but I really mean it as genuine and honest, is that good instruction often allows the instructor to learn from their students as much as they might be teaching their students. So the students learn from them. And why not take advantage or value? We have, again, going back to the data, that we know students are using this. We know it's overwhelmingly used by young people. My goodness, let them tell us how they're best using it, where they're finding value to it. And if they're saying, I'm just using this tool because the assessments aren't worth me doing it, right? To put it like really kind of starkly, then great. What would be an assessment that would be worth doing where you would be like, I'd either want to put in the work myself, or I would use generative AI for this aspect of it, but not that aspect of it. That'll probably be what they're using in the workplace. And if you talk to some people in some workplace settings, they'll all tell you, oh, they're using it. I mean, I don't want to call people out, but even at the university, even at UB, I've heard people coming from different departments, administrative departments, they're using these tools in their day-to-day practice. What are we doing if we want to prepare students for the workforce? And we want to prepare them to be active, contributing citizens. They're going to be using this technology. It's not going away. Great. So tell us how they're already using it. Let's leverage that expertise. Let's leverage what they know, what's happening in the workforce already if they're actually adult learners. Let's go with that and build assessments and learning around it.
Thank you, Sam. Returning to your conversation a little bit earlier about specific licenses and the ethics of forcing students to use certain programs, Tim chimed in. I'm wondering, though, about the ethics of requiring students to have a Khan account that will have access to their data. Khan in particular seems to chase fads and make big claims financed by big tech. Smiley face.
Yeah, Khan Academy. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's not fair. I don't like Khan Academy at all. Here I am. Recorded talk. I'm saying it. I don't like the Khan Academy at all. I think there's an argumentation here where we're talking about a dangerous future where, corporate interests will have control over like ubiquitous and fundamental pieces of technology. So let's be concerned about it, but let's not put our heads in the sand and hide from it either. Though it might be from a point of privilege, I think the idea we have to embrace is that humanity gets better. Boy, this is going to be a real far-reaching. You thought it was just about generative AI and assessment, but I think it is here. I think this actually is a relevant argument. The only way to make things better for everybody is not to fight over who has access to specific resources, but to grow the amount of resources that we have, to grow the pie. The only way everyone's going to get a bigger slice of pie is by making the pie even larger, not by taking away pie from somebody else. And I don't know if that makes me a neoconservative or something. God, I hope not. Sorry, not to offend anybody, but I think I do kind of subscribe to that, at least from a futurist, or someone who embraces the use of technology. And so by kind of growing the pie here, I think what we have with generative AI is a technology that allows more people more access to do more things. And as long as it's not in the control of a specific kind of group that is unchecked, then I think we're going to be fine. And to illustrate, I get nervous. For example, it wasn't too long ago that there were all these AI companies that were arguing for controls over who's going to be who can generate new AI tools. And the hysterical irony of that was that, sure, these companies were arguing over governmental control over the creation of these tools because they've already created the tools. So they're really just asking for like a government-related kind of monopoly, duopoly, oligarchy, whatever you want to say, over the use of these tools. And I would argue, and remember guys, I'm the director of the Open Education Research Lab. I firmly believe in open licensing and open technology. So I think actually the only way to do that would be to support open source technology and tools, which is why I kind of called out, Hugging Face and Mistral as like actual viable pieces of technology. Now, maybe that means we don't legislate, we embrace the use of generative AI. We provide a license to people using generative AI, but we don't require its specific use. You could think of it as like, great, I want every my students to use word processors, but they don't have to use Microsoft Word. They can use other word processors, even open source ones. And maybe that's where maybe that's what the policy needs to be. But I should probably stop there because my intention was to talk about assessment and not necessarily generative AI policies here. I also probably do have to wrap up somewhat soon at 5:11.
All righty. Do you want to wrap up now? Or do you have time for one more?
I have time for one more.
Okay. Should students and users in general be concerned that their unique ideas may not remain unique? Specifically, when someone shares their ideas with ChatGPT to improve their writing, is there a risk that these ideas could become widely known as AI tools learned from user inputs?
Okay, that's a fabulous question. And it's going to be oh boy, I'm glad this is one to go out on. I'm try and be very careful with my answer, but I'm gonna try and answer it. So the danger here, in particular, I would venture to say the true danger here is for artists who up until this point were able to create art and then make a living or survive on their art by able to monetize it through essentially copyright or control over who gets to use it. And I actually think art is a critical and chronically underserved part of society, and we should have more art. We should have more artists. I think it's actually super important. So I worry about the viability in the future of artists. But the protection of, you knew there was a but coming. But I think we've also suffered from an inflation of the value of an idea versus the execution of the idea. Again, not for art necessarily, but for other ideas. And so great, the generation of an idea is, what's the colloquial phrase? I'm using all kinds of incorrect vocabulary today. A dime a dozen, right? A good idea is a dime a dozen, right? Lots of good ideas. It's executing on the good idea that is often much more valuable. And I think this is a technology that's going to just make that much more concrete. So it's not so much, oh, did you have an interesting view of a new interpretation, or what you assumed was a new interpretation of the role of comic book heroes in modern American cinema? Maybe it's not that unique, maybe it's not that new, and maybe it's not that valuable. It might have been valuable for you creating it as an educative experience, but I don't know how much of a contribution it's made. Given that, I do think it's a very, very valid concern when it comes to art. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but I do know that the answer is not just fighting the technology. I think what the role of the artist is in the 21st century is going to change. And this is something that cuts deep. I have a daughter who's a senior in high school who, among her different career aspirations, one includes being a poet. And you can ask these tools to create poems. Not good poems, I would argue, but poems. Maybe we're ending a golden age of art, and we've got to rethink and reprioritize and conceptualize what it means art. What are the experiences of art? Just like it happened to the music industry, by the way, right? Where it used to be music artists could make their money off of selling of CDs, but now they have to make their money off of like concerts or merch, if you will. We might be facing the same kind of thing for art. That's not a great answer. I wish I had something much more reassuring. But on that not so positive note, I do have to get going. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Sam, and thanks all for coming. This was such a fantastic talk. Really appreciate it.
thank you, everyone. Fabulous questions, which makes me really happy, makes me feel like the right people were here. So, including myself.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks all. Have a great Tuesday.
Thank you, everyone.